The apartment was silent when I walked through the door after my shift. Too silent. I could feel something was wrong before I even switched on the lights. There was a smell, stale alcohol mixed with something else. Something that made my stomach turn. I flicked the lights on and stopped dead in my tracks. The living room was destroyed. There were empty beer bottles scattered across every surface. The couch, my new couch that I'd saved for 3 years to buy, had suspicious stains on it. There was vomit in the kitchen sink. The bathroom looked like a war zone. And in the center of my coffee table, there was a used condom. My name is Jordan Mitchell. I'm 28 years old. I work as a project manager for a software development company, making a decent salary that I've worked hard to build over the past 6 years. I grew up poor. My parents worked multiple jobs to make sure I had what I needed. They sacrificed their own comfort for my future. When I graduated college, I promised them I'd build something meaningful. I promised I'd never take for granted what they'd given me. This apartment was my safe space. I'd saved for years to afford it. I'd chosen every piece of furniture carefully. I'd decorated it with intention. It was mine. It represented my independence and my success. And my roommate, Casey, had just destroyed it. Casey and I had been roommates for 2 years. We'd met through a roommate finding app. Casey was a bartender, charismatic and outgoing, always the life of the party. I'd thought we'd be compatible. I'd thought it would be fine to split rent with someone like that. I'd been catastrophically wrong. Casey hadn't paid rent on time in 8 months. Casey had hosted parties without asking permission. Casey had eaten my food from the refrigerator and never replaced it. Casey had borrowed money and never paid it back. But I'd tolerated it all because I wanted to be understanding. I wanted to be the kind person. I wanted to believe that Casey was just going through a rough patch. But this was different. I called Casey immediately. My hands were shaking with rage as I dialed. "Hey, what's up?" Casey answered, their voice slurred. They were clearly still drunk. "What's up?" I repeated, my voice dangerously quiet. "Casey, what the hell did you do to my apartment?" "Oh, I had some friends over," Casey said casually. "No big deal. We just had a little party." "A little party?" I said. "Casey, my apartment is destroyed. There's vomit in my sink. There's a condom on my coffee table. My new couch is ruined. This is not a little party. This is destruction of property." "Don't be so dramatic," Casey said. "We'll clean it up." "You'll clean it up?" "Casey, you're drunk. You're not cleaning anything. You're going to stay where you are, and we're going to talk about this tomorrow when you're sober." I hung up the phone and stood in the middle of my destroyed apartment, feeling something shift inside me. I'd been patient with Casey. I'd been kind. I'd made excuses. And this was how Casey repaid that kindness, by destroying my space and then dismissing it like it was no big deal. I spent the rest of the night cleaning. I scrubbed the vomit from my sink. I wiped down my couch, which thankfully came clean, though I'd need to have it professionally cleaned to be sure. I picked up beer bottles. I took out the trash. By the time I went to bed, my apartment was clean again, but my mind was racing. This wasn't the first time something like this had happened. 3 months earlier, Casey had hosted another party that got out of hand. I'd come home to find strangers in my apartment. Casey had apologized then too. And I'd forgiven them. 2 months before that, Casey had borrowed $200, claiming it was an emergency. I'd given it to him. He'd never paid me back. 6 months ago, Casey had invited his ex-partner to stay, just for a few days. That person had ended up living in my apartment for 6 weeks before finally leaving. This was a pattern. A calculated pattern of taking advantage of my kindness and my trust. I made a decision that night. I was going to document everything. I was going to protect myself. And I was going to ensure that Casey understood what it meant to violate my trust. The next morning, I created a spreadsheet. I documented every incident. The party 3 months ago. The borrowed money. The ex-partner who'd stayed for 6 weeks. The parties. The missing food. The late rent payments. The destroyed furniture. The condom on my coffee table. I included dates, times, and specific details. I also started monitoring the apartment more carefully. I set up a security camera in my living room, positioned so I could see the main living space. I did this legally. I let Casey know I'd installed it, claiming it was for security purposes, which it was. Casey seemed uncomfortable about it but didn't object. Over the next month, I gathered evidence. I captured footage of Casey hosting another party. I documented the mess that followed. I photographed the damage. I kept receipts for everything I had to replace: furniture, dishes, items that had been broken or stolen during the parties. I also discovered something more important. Casey had been stealing from me. I found my favorite leather jacket missing from my closet. When I asked Casey about it, he claimed he'd borrowed it and then lost it. I found my laptop charger missing. Casey had lent it to someone at a party and never gotten it back. I found my Bluetooth speaker gone. My watch. My headphones. Hundreds of dollars worth of items that had simply disappeared because Casey had been lending them to people at parties without asking permission. I calculated the total damage: over $2,000 in destroyed property, stolen items, and unpaid rent. That's when I made my strategic move. I contacted a lawyer, Marcus Reynolds, who specialized in tenant and landlord disputes. I showed him all of my documentation. I showed him the security footage. I showed him the photographs of the damage. I showed him the list of stolen items. "This is systematic exploitation," Marcus said. "Your roommate has been taking advantage of your kindness for months. You have grounds to pursue a civil lawsuit for damages." "What I really want," I said, "is for Casey to leave my apartment and to understand the consequences of their actions." "Okay," Marcus said. "We can send a formal notice. We can document everything in a legal letter that makes it clear you're prepared to pursue legal action if necessary." That often encourages people to comply rather than face a lawsuit. Marcus drafted a comprehensive letter. It outlined every incident I'd documented. It included photographs and security footage timestamps. It calculated the total damage at $2,240. It gave Casey 30 days to either repay the damages in full or vacate the apartment. It warned that if Casey didn't comply, I would pursue a civil lawsuit. I served the letter to Casey in person, with a witness present, my best friend, Rachel. Casey's face went through several emotions as they read it. First confusion, then anger, then realization that I was serious. "You can't do this," Casey said. "We're friends." "Friends don't destroy each other's apartments," I said. "Friends don't steal from each other. Friends don't take advantage of each other's kindness." "I didn't steal anything," Casey protested. "I borrowed things." "You borrowed things without asking permission and then lost them or gave them away to other people," I said. "That's theft." "This is so unfair," Casey said, their voice getting desperate. "I'm struggling financially. I can't pay $2,000. "Then you need to move out," I said. "You have 30 days. Casey tried to negotiate. They asked if they could stay and pay me back gradually. They asked if I would forgive some of the debt. They asked if I would give them more time. I refused every offer. I'd been kind enough. I'd been patient enough. I'd made my boundaries clear by sending the legal letter, and now Casey needed to face the consequences of their actions. But Casey didn't leave. Instead, Casey tried a different strategy. They called my work. They told my boss that I was a terrible roommate who was kicking them out on the street. They made accusations that I'd stolen from them. They tried to make me look bad. My boss called me into her office concerned. I showed her the documentation. I showed her the legal letter. I showed her the security footage. I explained that I was protecting myself from someone who'd been exploiting my kindness. My boss understood immediately. "I'm sorry you're dealing with this," she said. "It sounds like you've handled it appropriately." Casey also tried to get my family involved. Casey called my mother and told her a sob story about how I was kicking them out unfairly. My mother, protective of me but also wanting to be kind, called me concerned. "Mom," I said, "Casey has been destroying my apartment, stealing from me, and taking advantage of my kindness for over a year. I've tried being nice. I've tried being understanding. And it's only made Casey think they can take more. I'm not being unfair. I'm protecting myself." I explained the entire situation to my mother. I showed her the documentation. I showed her the videos. My mother's perspective shifted immediately. "You're right," she said. "You've been too kind to this person. It's time to set a firm boundary." With 30 days approaching and Casey showing no signs of moving, I took the next step. I filed a formal eviction notice. In our state, landlords can evict tenants for non-payment of rent and for destructive behavior. Casey wasn't technically a landlord-tenant situation. We were co-tenants on the lease, but I could still pursue an eviction through the court system. I appeared before a judge and presented all of my evidence. The security footage was particularly damaging. The judge could see Casey hosting parties, could see the mess, could see the destruction. The judge awarded me the eviction and ordered Casey to pay me damages. Casey had to move out. Casey had to pay me $1,000 in damages. The judge reduced my claim somewhat, but found in my favor on the basic damages. And Casey's eviction record followed them. Any future landlord or employer who did a background check would see that Casey had been evicted. But the real satisfaction came in the aftermath. Casey had to move back in with their parents because they couldn't afford to move anywhere else. Their job at the bar became precarious. Their boss found out about the eviction and became concerned about Casey's reliability. Within 6 months, Casey was fired for not showing up to shifts. Casey's social circle began to distance themselves. People who'd partied at my apartment started to hear Casey's version of events, compared it to my version backed by evidence, and realized Casey had been exploiting me. I watched from a distance as Casey's life began to fall apart. Not because I'd destroyed it, but because Casey's own behavior had destroyed it. I'd simply held Casey accountable by refusing to accept the exploitation and by using the legal system to protect myself. But I also learned something important during this process. I learned that I needed to be more careful about who I let into my space. I learned that kindness without boundaries is just enabling bad behavior. I learned that protecting yourself isn't cruel, it's necessary. I also learned that I deserved better. After Casey moved out, I took time to really think about my apartment and my living situation. I realized that I'd been tolerating someone else's behavior because I didn't want to be seen as difficult or unkind. I'd been sacrificing my own peace and my own safety for someone else's comfort. I decided that I would never live with a roommate again. I picked up extra work. I took on freelance projects. I saved aggressively. Within 2 years, I'd saved enough money to buy my own small condo. It was mine. No one could damage it. No one could steal from it. No one could destroy my peace. I also became more intentional about my relationships. I surrounded myself with people who respected my boundaries. I distanced myself from people who took advantage of my kindness. I learned to say no without feeling guilty. My career also accelerated. With my apartment as a peaceful sanctuary and with my energy no longer being drained by Casey's exploitation, I was able to focus on my work. I was promoted to senior project manager. I started my own consulting side business. I traveled. I took vacations. I built a life I was proud of. 2 years after Casey moved out, I ran into Casey at a coffee shop. Casey looked rough. They'd gained weight, lost their job, moved back with their parents. Casey tried to act like everything was fine, but I could see the struggle beneath the facade. "Hey," Casey said, approaching me with a forced smile. "How have you been?" "I've been great," I said honestly. "Really great, actually. How about you?" "Oh, just working on some stuff," Casey said vaguely. "I'm actually really sorry about everything that happened with the apartment. I was going through a rough time, and I took it out on you. That wasn't fair." I appreciated the apology, but I also recognized it for what it was, Casey trying to repair the relationship because Casey had realized that losing me as a friend meant losing access to someone kind and forgiving. "I appreciate the apology," I said. "But I've moved on. I'm in a really good place now, and I'm focused on surrounding myself with people who respect my boundaries and my space." "I understand," Casey said quietly. "I hope you're happy." "I am," I said. "I really am." I finished my coffee and left the coffee shop. I didn't feel vindictive about Casey's struggles. I felt sad. I felt like Casey had so much potential, but had chosen a path of exploitation and manipulation instead of working on himself and building something real. But I also felt clear. I'd made the right choice to protect myself. I'd made the right choice to hold Casey accountable. I'd made the right choice to prioritize my own well-being over Casey's comfort. Here's what I learned through this experience. Sometimes the people closest to us exploit our kindness the most because they know we'll forgive them. Sometimes we have to stop being kind and start being firm. Sometimes protecting ourselves means disappointing other people or being seen as difficult or unkind. But the alternative, sacrificing our own well-being for someone else's comfort, is worse. It teaches people like Casey that they can get away with exploiting us. It teaches them that there are no consequences for bad behavior. It enables them to continue their cycle of exploitation with other people. By holding Casey accountable, by refusing to accept the exploitation, and by using the legal system to protect myself, I didn't just protect myself. I also sent a message to Casey that bad behavior has consequences. I also protected future people that Casey might have tried to exploit, because Casey learned that not everyone will tolerate that behavior. The best revenge wasn't destroying Casey. Casey destroyed themselves through their own choices. The best revenge was protecting myself, holding Casey accountable, and then moving on to build an incredible life that didn't include Casey at all. It was building something so good, so peaceful, so fulfilling that Casey's exploitation became irrelevant to my story. I got my apartment back. I got my peace back. I got my life back. And Casey got a lesson about consequences. That's the last laugh. That's the real victory. If you've been exploited by a roommate or a friend, if you've had your kindness taken advantage of, I want to hear your story. Drop a comment below and tell me how you reclaimed your space and your peace. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of justice, betrayal, and triumph. ***. Subscribe now and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. These stories of people who've stood up to exploitation and built incredible lives are coming your way. You won't want to miss a single one. ***. ## the moral of the story. Exploitation thrives when there are no boundaries. Casey didn't wake up one day and decide to destroy my apartment. Casey gradually tested my boundaries, and when I didn't enforce them, Casey kept pushing further and further. By the time I finally took action, the situation had become severe. What I learned was that protecting yourself isn't cruel. Setting boundaries isn't being difficult. Holding people accountable for their behavior isn't being unkind. These are the things that healthy, functional people do. These are the things that allow relationships to be based on respect rather than exploitation. I also learned that you can't save people who don't want to be saved. Casey had every opportunity to change. Casey could have paid me back the money. Casey could have apologized and changed their behavior. Casey could have worked on being a better person. Instead, Casey chose to make excuses, to blame me, and to try to manipulate the situation. By refusing to engage with that manipulation, by holding firm to my boundaries, and by pursuing legal accountability, I allowed Casey to face the natural consequences of their actions. I didn't destroy Casey's life. Casey destroyed their own life. I just refused to participate in the destruction anymore. If you're being exploited by someone, remember this. You are not responsible for that person's comfort or well-being. You are responsible for protecting yourself and your own peace. Set clear boundaries. Document everything. Get help if you need it. And then follow through, even if it's uncomfortable or if the other person doesn't like it. Your peace is worth protecting. Your space is worth defending. Your kindness is worth preserving for people who actually deserve it. That is the best revenge. That is the last laugh.